on the screen right now. Why don't you pull out your phone, take a photo of the screen, just in case it goes away before you can write it all down. And when you give, just know it goes towards some amazing ministries. And if you'd like to know what your giving goes towards, you can go to the rockchristianfamily.com/give, and all the information is there. Hey, if over the next 30 to 35 minutes you find content that's helpful, please go to our YouTube channel or our podcast on Apple or Spotify or our Facebook page to stay up to date with content that you can get all throughout the week. Just type in the Rock Christian Family and you'll find our channels there. Now, I'm going to invite the service host to come up onto the stage and tell you what are the top 3 things that you need to know that's happening at the Rock Christian Family right now. Good morning, everybody. How are we doing? Am I coming through? Yeah, I'm coming through. All right. My name is John. I'm the same guy that was on the screen. I promise next year that won't be the case. But the 3 things that I want you to know that are happening, I'm going to utilize one of the 3 for what has happened. We had an awesome week as with ministries within the Rock Christian Family. On Friday night, Transit Youth went to the ice skating rink, and I know a lot of you were there, and that was just a great family event. It was cold, it was busy. William was on the ground like 100 times. Hey, bud, he persevered, and he got through. So that's the first, and so that's one thing that happened. And then yesterday, Saturday, we held the Global Leadership Summit at Northreach Baptist Church. It was a combined churches event, and it was just amazing. If you attended, I don't know about you, but I am feeling very mentally and emotionally exhausted from yesterday, and so I'm very excited to bring the sermon today. To get through that. So yesterday was just an amazing day, and if you want to register for next year, you can still do that with a really cheap discount. So that's the first thing. Secondly, what's coming up is Stable on the Strand. So that's from Stable NQ. Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Stable NQ is happening December 18th through to the 22nd. There is still time for you to get involved if you want to volunteer. There is an area to volunteer for everyone. Whether you want to have a big head on and pretend to be a wise man, or you like hospitality, or you like performing, or you like managing performers, there's something for everyone, and you can still volunteer for Stable NQ, which is happening at Riverway. Thirdly, December 18th, which is the first day of Stable, but it's also the last service of the year, and that's going to be our Christmas service. And we are doing a very planned, spontaneous Christmas pageant. So a planned, spontaneous Christmas pageant is happening December 18th as our Christmas service. And the reason why that's our last service is because we want everyone to volunteer at Stable NQ, but we also want to give our amazing volunteers an opportunity to be with their family over the holiday, over the Christmas period. So December 18th is our last service. We will be back in the room like the second Sunday in January. But there will be online messages that you can tune in for if you so wish. But really, we want to be with our families around Christmas time and celebrating what Jesus has done, like Jesus coming to this earth, and we want to celebrate with our families with no added expectation on our volunteers. So that's happening, and those are the 3 things that you need to know. Now, Kids Rock, it is time for you to head to the back of the room. If this is your first time, what we're going to do, kids, you're going to head to the back of the room with your parents if they wish to take you there, and they will be greeted by our Kids Rock team in the teal shirts. They will take them to the Kids Rock room, and while that's happening, why don't you say hi to those around you? All right. Well, today is part 2 of our series, Winning. Last week, if you remember, we talked about the fact that it's easy to know how to win in the sporting arena or in card games because the rules are defined and the competition is set out before you. But in life, or the most important arenas of our life, it's hard to determine if you are winning or not. And how can you determine if you're winning if you don't define the win in those areas of your life? Remember, we talked about in your marriage, what is the win for your marriage? In our families with your kids, what's the win for your kids?
Financially, what's the win financially, professionally, personally? We talked about you got to be able to define the win in the key areas of your life if you want to reach the win. Otherwise, you might just end up wandering aimlessly. So I hope you guys did the homework and wrote down some areas of the win in your different areas of your life. But today I'm going to take a different angle. So once you know what the win is, there are some key things that we can do to help us win, especially coming into the holiday season. And something that we all have in common is that when good things happen, or on the back end of like a rough stretch in our life, there's this instinctive, intuitive, automatic feeling of gratitude. We're grateful. And there's this sense of relief. When things are going great, when you're a good stretch of your life, or when you're coming through a really rough season and you're at the tail end of it, you feel thankful. We all feel thankful, right? Feeling thankful or expressing our gratitude is something that hopefully you are taught from a very young age, from when you were born up until now, right? When you get something as a kid, you're expected to say thank you. This is a universal experience. Some people will say, thank goodness, or others might say literally, oh, thank you, God, that this has happened. We thank somebody or something. We're all instinctively thankful, though we may express it in different ways. It's almost like we can't help it. We can't help feeling thankful. We can't help the feeling of gratitude. Because when it comes to expressing our gratitude to each other, it's not always intuitive. It's not always automatic. It's not always instinctive. The feeling of gratitude is automatic, intuitive, and instinctive, but sometimes how we express it, or if we express it, is a totally different story. It's a totally different story because it's not always instinctive for everybody. It might look different, and oftentimes we do help it, right? We can't help but feeling grateful or thankful, but sometimes we do help it in terms of how we express it. We sometimes withhold our gratitude, and when we do, when we withhold the gratitude that we might be feeling, but we don't express it to anyone, what we're doing is we're creating a gap. We're creating a gap, or an unfilled space, or an unfinished business, which creates a glitch in your relationships. And if it goes on for too long, it undermines the integrity of the relationship. It's one thing to feel grateful, another thing to express gratitude. To put it bluntly, few things sting more than ingratitude, right? Few things sting more, few things harm a relationship more, can someone get me water, please, than ingratitude. Ingratitude communicates, I don't see you. Ingratitude communicates, you owe me that, so why would I thank you? Thank you. I didn't plan that, but I'm expressing my gratitude to my mother-in-law. Ingratitude communicates like, you owed me that anyways. Why would I thank you for that? Ingratitude stings because it's not neutral. It's not a neutral thing. It's the opposite of what's expected. It's the opposite of what's earned. It's the opposite of what's perhaps deserved. So it hurts, which is odd because the other person didn't do anything. They didn't do anything to you, but they just didn't do anything. They didn't do anything to you, but they didn't do anything. They didn't express anything. You thought that they would hit the tennis ball back to you, but they just stopped there and let the tennis ball bounce against the fence behind them. There are few things more hurtful than ingratitude. At the same time, there are few things more uncomfortable than pointing out somebody else's ingratitude, right? It feels childish saying, hey, what about a thank you once in a while? Hey, you never stop and say how much you appreciate me. I mean, who wants to say that? Who wants to point out the other person's ingratitude? Because when the person responds with, I'm sorry that I haven't been meeting your grateful needs, I'm sorry that I haven't been saying thank you or recognizing you enough, they are probably genuinely sorry because they didn't know that they were withholding this gratitude from you. But what we hear is this: I'm so sorry, little baby who needs constant reassurance and affirmation, right? You just feel a little bit like, you feel insecure, you feel childish, that you need that recognition to feel good. They're genuine with their sorriness, but in our insecurity, we hear something completely different, right? Ingratitude, it's a strange thing because it's not an even thing. It's a lack of a thing. It's not a thing, it's a lack of a thing. But it doesn't always come packaged in silence or lack of a response. Sometimes ingratitude is actually expressed verbally, right? You've all heard this before. We do something and then someone says, "Oh, you didn't quite do that good enough. You didn't quite do that right. If it were me, I would have done it this way." All you're looking for is a thank you and move on, but they're saying, "Next time, could you tuck the sheets in when you make the bed?" Right? Thank you. I'm not going to thank you for making the bed, but I don't like the sheets tucked. You know what I mean? They correct what you did out of the kindness of your heart. And so sometimes ingratitude doesn't have words, but sometimes you just get, it has words in the sense that you're always being corrected, right? The other thing about ingratitude is that it looms large when we're the victim, right? Ingratitude, when we're the victim, it looms large. It's like screaming to us, "How dare you not be grateful for what I've just done?" It's all we see when someone has been ungrateful to us. We can't miss it, but it's completely invisible when we're the perpetrator, right? Think about it. When we create a gap through our ingratitude, it's all the other person can see. But we can't see it at all. It's amazing how that happens. When we create the gap, it's all the other person can see, but we can't see it at all. We're clueless, which is obvious to the other person. It's obvious to the other party involved, and that's what makes the pain so much worse. So it looms large. The recipient is always aware, right? The recipient of ingratitude is always aware that ingratitude looms. It looms large. There's a gap between the relationship. The person that didn't receive the gratitude is always aware, but the culprit is rarely aware. When you haven't been grateful or you haven't expressed your gratitude to someone else, you're probably less aware than the other person is, right? Gratitude, it goes a long way in our life. That's why we're taught from such a young age that gratitude's so important. But ingratitude goes a long way as well. There are people, like in my life, this is something that I would struggle with, that I have a difficult time extending myself to, that I have a difficult time extending my resources, my time, my energy to, because of the ingratitude that happened the last encounter, right? It leaves a mark. When there's ingratitude and when you've done something for somebody out of the kindness of your heart, it looms large when there's no gratitude given, and we're probably less likely to want to extend ourselves to that person again, right? But as Jesus followers, if you're in this room and you're a Jesus follower, Jesus says that we are to be grateful regardless of we get recognition or not. We are to love everyone regardless of what they do back to us. We're to love everybody always. And my reason for bringing my issue up with this is our accidental ingratitude, which you may not even be aware of, it's leaving a mark. It's leaving a mark. It's undermining our respectability. And sometimes we don't even know it. The ungrateful people that I struggle not to write off have no idea. They have no idea what they've done. And the people who've written you off because of your ingratitude, you have no idea that that's happened, right? If you're not family, they probably won't tell you. If they're just like an acquaintance or a coworker or someone that you see every now and then, they'll just move on, and you don't know that there's a relational gap. In our family, they probably will tell you because you're more comfortable with one another, but you don't know that you're leaving that relationship a little bit damaged because it's uncomfortable to talk about this. It's uncomfortable to call out ingratitude. You're worried about what the other person will think and that you're needy. And this is actually something that's uncomfortable for me to talk about because I'm sure that I have caused a gap in some of our relationships with my lack of gratitude. And if that is the case, I'm very sorry. But the culprit is rarely aware But maybe all you see when you see me talking sometimes is, this guy's not grateful for the things that I've done. Often the culprit is unaware, but the victim is very aware, and it's all that they can see. Recognition is what you're hoping for, right? When you do something out of the kindness of your heart, recognition is something that you're hoping for. This happens most, I would say, with the people that we live with. You want to get recognized with the people that you live with, right? I'm going to use an example with Fiona and I, not to puff ourselves up, but just to give you an example. Fiona and I always try to make a point to recognize what the other person has done, even if it's an everyday task. I would say, Fiona, thank you so much for making the bed this morning. I mean, we have different things that we do, and that's something that she does, and I am so grateful. And why do I do that? Because I don't want to take it for granted. She doesn't have to make the bed. I want to say, I see what you have done. You didn't have to do that, and I am grateful. One thing that I do every day is most days, I will say, I do the dishes. And so she will say, John, thank you for doing the dishes. And what does that do? That creates a recognition, and it makes me feel that I have been seen and that she doesn't take me for granted. So often with the people in our lives, especially the people that you live with or the people that we care about most, we take each other for granted, and it leaves a relational gap. Maybe it creates bitterness. Maybe it creates a grudge towards one another. And why would we allow that relational gap to happen when all it takes is a thank you. I see you. I see what you've done. I am appreciative of what you've done. I am grateful for what you've done. And you know what? When Fiona thanks me for doing the dishes on Monday, I'm more likely to want to do them on Tuesday. When you get recognized for something that you have done, even if it's something as simple as doing the dishes, you are more likely to want to do that again because, hey, I'm just going to be honest with us. We all want recognition. Sometimes we hear that recognition is a bad thing, and in some instances it is, but relationally, especially in your marriages and with your kids and in your families, or with your really close friends, your extended family, your in-laws, recognition goes a long way. So let's stop having a relational gap. Say thank you, especially for the people that you love most. Because when we don't, what we're communicating is that we take them for granted. We're communicating that we take them for granted. It's like you're communicating, they have to do that. That's part of their duty. It's their job to do that. They got nothing better to do. They owe me anyways. I don't owe them. Have you ever felt taken for granted? Like everything you're doing goes unnoticed? It's not a good feeling. It's not a good feeling. It's terrible, in fact. Sometimes it feels like dehumanizing. If you've ever been accused of being ungrateful, I imagine you probably got defensive. And the reason you did is because you felt like you were being accused of not feeling something. If you've ever been accused of not feeling grateful, you feel like you're being accused of not feeling something. We feel judged, so we get defensive. Besides, how do they know how we actually feel? How do they know? How can they accuse me of not being grateful? They don't know how I feel. That's the point. They don't know how we feel. They know how they feel. They don't know how we feel. They feel unappreciated and taken for granted, but we feel otherwise. We feel grateful, so we push back. We might say, but I am grateful. I am grateful for you. Translated, I'm grateful on the inside. I have grateful thoughts. I am so grateful that you are in my life. I have grateful feelings towards you. While this is true, it's completely meaningless. Your feelings of gratitude towards someone else does not translate to closing the gap in your relationships. It's not about the feeling. It's meaningless. And this is the point of the discussion today. Unexpressed gratitude is experienced as ingratitude. It's one thing to feel it, but if you don't express it, the other person is seeing it as ingratitude. Right? Sometimes advice for busy dads, you love your kids, or busy moms, we love our kids with all of our hearts. with all of our hearts, we have this feeling of love towards our children, but unfortunately, the feeling of love sometimes doesn't translate to our calendars. It's one thing to feel the love for them, but if it doesn't translate to the calendar is what counts. The calendar is what connects. The calendar is what communicates what you feel. It's what you do with the feeling that communicates what you feel. The same goes for gratitude. It's the expression, not the emotion. It's the expression of gratitude that counts, not the emotion. This completes the circle in the relationship, right? It closes the gap or maintains the connection. To put it another way, gratitude and ingratitude are relationally determinative. Gratitude and ingratitude are relationally determinative. They determine so much of yourself. They determine and they show if you're willing to entrust yourself to someone else and how much he or she is willing to entrust with you. When you feel taken for granted, we instinctively withhold part of ourselves in order to not be hurt. We withhold part of ourselves in order to not be taken advantage of, to feel we protect our hearts, we guard our hearts. And I mean, it's healthy to guard our hearts, right? You don't want to give every part of yourself to everyone else and have nothing left. It's important to guard our hearts. Gratitude and ingratitude are relationally determinative. They determine something about the relationship. Let's think about it this way. Our hearts gravitate towards recognition and gratitude. Our hearts gravitate towards recognition and gratitude. It's not a decision, it's a response. If you're married or in what you hope to be a permanent relationship, here's a tip. Don't let anyone outgrateful you. Don't let anyone outgrateful you. In your marriage, with your closest friends, at work, wherever you spend a lot of time, maybe you're not married and you don't have a family and you live alone, who do you spend the most time with? Don't ever let anyone outgrateful you. Be the most grateful person of your loved one's life because, again, our hearts gravitate towards recognition and gratitude. I think all of our kids are out at transit, but maybe parents, you want to show this to your kids after church because this is something that maybe will change the dynamic of your homes. Kids, I'm talking to you watching after church. Be ridiculously grateful for everything your parents do every single day. They do not owe you anything. They do not have to do what they do. You don't have the right. They don't owe you everything they do. They don't have to take you to soccer practice. They don't have to take you to gymnastics. They don't have to drive you to school and pick you up from school. They don't have to give you a bed. They don't have to do all of these things. We are all full-time volunteers, especially as parents. Turn up the grateful scale. Be grateful for everything your parents do. They do not have to do it. And what's going to happen when you're grateful? You are going to melt their hearts, and if you want to get more yeses than nos, just be grateful. Parents, we want recognition from our kids. If you don't, I think you're lying. We want recognition from our kids, right? We want them to recognize what you have done for them in your life. And we talked about what the win is in our families last week. If we have mutual recognition for one another, parents, this goes for recognizing when your kids have done something awesome too, then they are going to want to be with you every step of the way. They're going to want to be at home even when they don't have to be. Anyhow, kids, be ridiculously grateful. Ridiculously grateful. There's a famous narrative in the life of Jesus that underscores this whole point. I know we've taken about 14 minutes to get to Scripture. You can send me an email if you want, but we're getting there now. In the book of Luke, Luke underscores this point that we're making. And so when I've talked about gratefulness a few years ago, and if you were here, you would have heard this passage, but a lot of you weren't here a few years ago. Anyhow, whenever I read this statement, I think about who are the people in my life that I haven't been grateful to. It always sort of brings this healthy conviction on who do I need to express my gratitude to. Anyhow, this is what it says. Now, on his way to Jerusalem, Jesus traveled along the border between Samaria and Galilee. So he was going, it was a very remote and sparsely populated region. He was traveling towards the border between Samaria and Galilee. As he was going into a village, 10 men who had leprosy met him. So these 10 men were hovering between life and death. They weren't dead, but they couldn't really live like everyone else could live. They were on the outskirts of town. They had to stand at a distance watching everyone else, how they lived their life. And in ancient times, leprosy was considered highly contagious. It was like viewed as COVID on steroids. Like you could not socially distance 5 meters. I don't think so. It was like 5 kilometers that they had to socially distance. So they had to stand on the outskirts of town watching everyone else live while they were forgotten about. And people affected with leprosy, they don't experience pain the way we do. In a culture that required physical labor to survive, this often resulted in injuries that went untreated and unnoticed. So their bodies would visibly deteriorate over time. The law requires lepers to live on the outskirts of town. They had to live on the outskirts of town in a designated area and to warn people when they were approaching. They had to tell people like, hey, I've got leprosy, watch out. How humiliating is that? Lepers often created their own communities. They grew their own crops and survived the best that they could. It would come as no surprise to first century readers that a community of lepers were eking out, living on the remote border between living and death. They stood at a distance, so with their faces covered. They stood at a distance with their faces covered. I mean, a few years ago, that would have made a lot of sense, right? Even now, I know the government is sometimes encouraging people to wear masks, but that was like their life. So with their faces covered, they stood at a distance and called out in a loud voice, Jesus, Master, have pity on us. They recognized Jesus by his reputation, right? When they called out Master, it was unusual because only Jesus' closest followers, maybe even just his disciples, would call out Master. And so they weren't really his closest followers. This is probably their first encounter with Jesus, but they're already recognizing the reputation that he has in the land, so they call out Master. And this is their only hope. Like they're at the end of their rope, so they're giving everything that they can. They call out Master. This is what he says. When he saw them, he said, go. That wasn't unexpected for them. They've heard go for years. They've heard go away for their whole lives. But he says, go, show yourselves to the priests. To which they must have thought, go show them what? There's nothing to show. We have leprosy. Besides, the priests aren't all that anxious to see us either. Why would I go see the priests if they don't really want to see us? Nobody wants to see us. But Jesus sort of had a triple intent here. According to the law, anyone with skin disease, after being quarantined, had to go to a local priest and be given the all clear to come back into the communities before returning to society. The implication was this. The implication was by the time you get there, you guys will be all clear. You're not right now, but by the time you get there, you'll be cleansed. You'll be clear of your disease that you've been having for such a long time. But there was more to this. When he healed the lepers and they showed up to the priest, 10 lepers showed up to a priest, surely the priest would ask how you were healed, right? This would be a miraculous thing that had happened. 10 people at the same time just don't get healed. It would be so extraordinary that they would have to wonder what happens. They would have to wonder how this happened. It would be a living testimony of the power of Jesus Christ. So they would have to trust that Jesus is who he said he was, and he had the power to do it. He would be going to the priest and giving a testimony of what Jesus had done, and he would be getting recognition from these 10 lepers and everyone of that he is who he said he claims to be, that he is the Son of God. And their willingness to go before anything had changed would have certainly been an expression of extraordinary faith in Jesus. If nothing changed on the way, just think about this. It would be a long trip to the priest. They have leprosy. Jesus is saying, go see a local priest. If nothing changed, they would look pretty foolish, right? They would look foolish, and they would just be embarrassed and cast on the outskirts of town again, saying, please don't return. So Jesus said, go. And they went. Not because it made any sense, but because of who was sending them. And as they went, they were cleansed. They literally walked by faith. They responded to the promise and the prompting of Jesus before they even knew what the outcome was going to be. And that's what it means to walk by faith. Then the twist in the story comes here. And as they went, they were cleansed. One of them, when he saw he was healed, came back. He turned around. He returned and completed the loop. He shut the relational gap. He came back praising God in a loud voice. So he threw himself at Jesus' feet and thanked him. No more social distancing. No more calling out Master from a distance. No, he went right up to Jesus and fell at Jesus' feet. He wasn't content just to feel grateful. It wasn't about the feeling of gratitude. He demonstrated it. He expressed his feelings to Jesus. He expressed it as much as he wanted to get back to living among the living, as much as he wanted to get to the priest so he get the all clear and get on with his life. He knew that he had to close the gratitude loop. After all, Jesus had given his life back. Jesus had given him his life back. He did what we all need to do. He went back to thank the one who enabled him to move forward. He went back to the one that enabled him to move forward. Looking back over the story of Jesus' life, Luke must have just smiled with this next line. And he was a Samaritan. And he was a Samaritan. The implication is the others weren't. The 9 that did not feel compelled to express their gratitude towards Jesus, the implication of highlighting that the one returned was a Samaritan means that maybe the other 9 weren't. This man had experienced some sort of miracle in his life, and he was so grateful. But because he was a Samaritan, there was extra alienation for this man. There was extra discrimination on multiple levels. So he was extra grateful. The reason for this added, seemingly important detail comes to light when you read Luke's entire gospel. Over and over, Luke highlights Jesus' encounters with outsiders, the people his first century audience would least expect Jesus to have anything to do with. And over and over and over again, outsiders expressed the most gratitude towards him. They were not confused about how undeserving they were. Sometimes we just feel like we deserve everything we get. But Jesus, time and time again, when he meets with outsiders, they are never unaware of how undeserving they were, and they always express their gratitude to him. Jesus asked the man, "Were not all 10 cleansed? Where are the other 9? Where's everyone else?" Jesus isn't expecting an answer. He's just making an observation, right? Something is missing in the situation. Some ones are missing. The other 9 have missed the moment to close the loop. They missed their opportunity. Consequently, something was missing. Something was missing. Something was incomplete. Something was unfinished. Something was open-ended. The circle wasn't closed, but the window to close the circle was closed. Parents understand this dynamic, right? When we were kids, and someone gave us a gift, or parents would say thank you, as in, do it right now, there was an urgency to your response, right? We learn to say thank you as soon as we get the gift. We teach our kids to say thank you when you get your plate of food on the table, when you get your bottle of water in bed, whatever it is. There was urgency in this message. Quick, say thank you. Time is running out. In other words, close the circle. Close the circle. Connect the dots. That was Jesus' point. The other 9 had missed the moment to shut the gap. They had missed the moment to close the circle. And the moment had passed. How ungrateful. Their entire destiny had been changed. Their entire lives had been flipped upside down. Apart from Jesus' invitation, they would spend the rest of their lives on the outskirts of town, living in the middle of nowhere. They had been restored to their families and their children. Their lives had been completely changed. They could work and worship again. Where are they? Jesus asks. Where are they? And when we read the story, we respond the same way Jesus did. And we think, well, yeah, where are those guys? Of course they should be grateful. Why didn't they turn back? And I imagine, before we judge too quickly, I imagine that if someone confronted the other 9 about their lack of gratitude, they would probably say, what are you talking about? We are so grateful. We know what this means for our life. We know what Jesus just did. He just allowed us to move forward. We feel it. We feel grateful. They felt grateful, but they didn't express it. They probably had the feeling of gratitude because of what this meant for their lives moving forward, but they didn't express it. Jesus, like us, was baffled, and he asks, has no one returned to give praise to the God except this foreigner? Except this foreigner? Only one returner? The question is a rebuke. It also implies that the other lepers may have been Galileans like Jesus rather than Samaritans. Then he said to him, rise and go. This is the second time that Jesus told him to go. But this time there would be no reason for this man to return. The circle was complete. Then Jesus made this concluding statement. Then he said to him, rise and go. Your faith has made you well. Rise and go. Your faith has made you well. As we wrap up, I want to give us 3 quick observations to carry with us throughout the week. The first one that we've already touched on is this. Unexpressed gratitude, what does it do? It communicates ingratitude. It's not enough to just feel it. You have to express it because there's no neutral ground. And our feelings, they don't count. Because our feelings don't connect. Our feelings of gratitude don't close the loop. Worse, the gratitude we feel but we don't express is felt by the other person as the opposite of what we actually feel. We feel grateful, but they feel unappreciated. They feel taken for granted. They feel not seen. And here's another thing. Bragging on the other person of how grateful you are for that person to someone else, that doesn't count either, right? If you go on a double date or whatever it is and you say, oh, my wife, she's just amazing. She always makes the bed and I'm so grateful for her, but you never actually tell her that to her face, that can be a bit of a backhanded compliment, right? It's like, say that to my face. Our relationship could be so much stronger if you just express the gratitude that you just told this person. Are you just doing this all for show? Are you taking me for granted? So bragging on the close person in your life to someone else, that doesn't count if you're not bragging to the person's faith. Second, ingratitude feels like rejection. Ingratitude feels like rejection. Over time, unexpressed gratitude has the same effect on a relationship as rejection. It creates a gap, right? Our hearts gravitate towards acceptance. Do you want your heart to gravitate towards your child, your spouse, your employees, or your associates? Do you want their hearts to gravitate towards you? Express your gratitude. If you don't, then there's going to be a relational gap. There's going to be a relational gap. It's not enough to just feel it. Ingratitude feels like rejection. Unexpressed gratitude may indicate an inflated view of self. The message of ingratitude is this. I could have done this on my own, right? I didn't need your help. I'm glad you helped out, but I totally could have done this on my own. Ingratitude says that I don't need anybody else to help me out. I'm covered. That was a nice bonus, but I really didn't, to be honest, I don't need anybody in my life. It inflates our ego, it inflates ourselves, and it makes us look like we never need help from anyone. Gratitude sometimes feels like an admission of weakness. It makes you feel like you could have not done this without the other person's help. Guess what? Probably couldn't. In the wake of your progress and success that's in your rearview mirror, professionally, academically, athletically, relationally, and financially, are dozens of people who have facilitated and helped you and done everything that they could to help you get there. In every success in your life is a team of people, whether you realize it or not, that are supporting you to get there. So as I wrap up this time, the message that we need to take home today, if we want to win in our relationships, if you want to win in life, if you want to win in your marriage, if you want to win with your kids, if you want to win relationally, professionally, and personally, it's not enough just to feel the gratitude. Don't be like the other 9. The other 9 felt grateful for what Jesus has done. Sometimes, I'm going to probe a little bit, we can be like the other 9 for Jesus. We can be like the other 9 for Jesus. We can show up to church on a Sunday, but we go, I don't really need him to get through my day-to-day. I don't need to express my gratitude to him, right? We can be so easily like the other 9. What we want to do is we want to be like the one. Don't just feel grateful. Close the relational gap, because the longer you let ingratitude to dwell, the greater the gap is, and to be honest, a grudge is probably going to happen, and then there's going to be a lot more cleanup to do to close the gap. It's not enough to feel grateful. We need to express gratitude. Coming into the holiday season, coming into Christmas, it is so important to express the gratitude for your loved ones. Maybe you have some people that are close to you that there is a relational gap. You know that there's a gap. There's unforgiveness, there's hurt, there's pain, and we know this, that in the holidays, those things are magnified. When things aren't going well, everything that's going on beneath the surface comes to the surface. And if we want to win at the end of this year, let's close those relational gaps. Express gratitude, don't just feel it. God, we thank you for Jesus. We are grateful for what he has done for us. We know, God, that you didn't have to send him. You didn't have to send your only son to die on the cross to be the sacrifice for our sins. But because of the love that you had for us, you did. And we don't want to have a day that goes by without saying thank you for what you have done for us. God, we don't want to have a day that goes by without thanking the loved ones around us for what they do for us. We don't want to take them for granted. So this week, God, I pray that we would be reminded of the importance of expressing gratitude, that we would not be out-gratefuled by anybody in our life, that we would have a grateful competition. We pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. Hey, thank you so much for being here today. If you've got kids at Kids Rock, please head to the Kids Rock room to grab them before you have coffee. If you snuck in and this is your first time without a welcome bag, we would love to get you one at the back, and we'd love to connect with you with a cup of coffee.